starting our narrated PowerPoint on consciousness and drugs. There are a few questions that and things that you should be able to answer. Here, this is kind of the overview. What is a psychoactive drug? We did that in class, I think in all the classes, but I'll go over it again. There is a very nice online animation that many of you saw in other classes about they take different mice and animate them as if they are on one of the substances, and then they show you what's happening in the brain. That is very useful for kind of seeing in detail what happens in terms of the mechanism of the drug and how it acts in our nerve pathways, which I am expecting you to know for a few of them that I'll list. You should know the positive uses and potential harm. You should understand dependence, physical and psychological. You should know the major types of drugs and the effects in general of them, the mechanisms of a few of them, and some examples of each type of drug. And then you should understand the mechanisms for 4 specific ones: cocaine, amphetamines, alcohol, and narcotics. These are not the types of drugs I go over, are not all the ones out there, but just the major classes that we're going to focus on for this unit. For example, we don't bring into the discussion antidepressants in this one. This is not a great slide, I apologize. What is a psychoactive drug? We talked about this in class. Some chemical substance that acts primarily on the central nervous system, altering the way your brain operates, maybe changing mood, perception, consciousness, or behavior. Any psychoactive drug has to get through the blood-brain barrier. So we ingest a lot of toxins or potential toxins into our body that get into our bloodstream. We protect the central nervous system more carefully than the bloodstream. It is difficult for most substances to pass through that barrier. Some that do are those that mimic the structure of our natural neurotransmitters, and those can make it through. This can make trying to develop drugs that treat potential symptoms or disorders tricky, because you have to worry about how you're going to get it across the blood-brain barrier. The benefits and dangers. There are a large variety of positive uses for psychoactive drugs. Sedation for surgery or other uses. Pain relief is a critical function, and then they are used to treat a wide variety of disorders. There are a lot of dangers too. There are short-term risks. There are a whole host of long-term physical risks and harm to your body that you can do with prolonged usage. I'm not going to go into those in detail. You, I'm sure, had them in health class. One of the reasons that people are susceptible to long-term risks is that many drugs create either a physical or a psychological dependence. There's a risk of injection, and not only is there the harm that you can do to your own body, but prolonged usage and overusage can cause harm to relationships and to the wider society. Dependence. Physical dependence is when your body actually alters due to the drug on a long-term basis, or more than just temporarily while you're high, and the body becomes unable to function normally without the drug. An example would be heroin or any of the opiates, where in response to the usage of the drug, the body actually begins to produce fewer endorphins, and so when you stop using the drug, you don't have the normal levels of endorphins in your body, and so you don't get the natural pain relief that you should, and your body goes through intense pain. Psychological dependence. The body hasn't been altered once the drug is out of your system, but the user has the belief that the drug is needed to continue a feeling of emotional or psychological well-being. This gets into conditioning and the reinforcement you get using it creates pathways in your brain through your reward system, and you get positively reinforced. So the rewarding properties of the drug in your central nervous system cause a dependency to develop. The main types that we're going to talk about today would be stimulants, depressants, narcotics, and hallucinogens. Stimulants. What do they do? Stimulants increase the functioning of the central nervous system. So what it's doing, stimulants make them do more of it, and they speed it up. The experience of people taking stimulants would be intense pleasure, also relaxation, which might seem contradictory a little bit, and they are appetite suppressants. There are a number of types of stimulants. One would be amphetamines, which are synthesized, and the kind of cousin of amphetamines, methamphetamine. The experience for people taking amphetamines is similar to the general idea of intense pleasure, relaxation, appetite suppressant. But what they do is they give you a feeling of great energy, not because they give you energy, but you just use up the energy you have more quickly, and then you crash. They can sometimes be prescribed as appetite suppressants to treat obesity. The mechanism for amphetamines, and again, like I said, you can see this in more detail on the website that does the mouse animation, is that they are an agonist for dopamine. So you have to remember what agonist and antagonist is. An agonist is some sort of drug or poison that will effectively increase the activity of a neurotransmitter. Now that can happen in different ways. In the case of amphetamines, they cause more to be released into the synapse. There are a number of natural stimulants, cocaine, nicotine, caffeine, that can be derived from plant products. Cocaine, from the coca leaf, creates strong physical dependence and can result in compulsive use without any kind of regard for consequences. And this has been seen in humans as well as in rats that will ignore food and water to continually ingest cocaine. It is so addicting. The agonist, or the mechanism for cocaine, is like amphetamines. It is an agonist for dopamine as well, but it acts in a different way. It actually blocks reuptake, so more of it stays in the synaptic gap and effectively kind of increases the activity of dopamine. Nicotine. Nicotine is a mild stimulant, but it is, as you know, highly addictive. What stands out about nicotine is it is the most deadly drug in America, and it's not even close. Even though tobacco usage has fallen over the last few decades, the book mentions that more people die from cocaine usage, heroin, other drug abuse, alcohol, AIDS, suicide, homicide, and motor vehicle accidents combined. More people die from tobacco usage than all of those things combined. Nicotine works by it causes arousal, it raises blood pressure, accelerates the heart rate, and you get a rush of sugar into the bloodstream. It's very hard to quit because it's so addictive, and you get very bad withdrawal symptoms. And then, of course, one of the more common stimulants would be caffeine. It's a mild stimulant. Depressants. Depressants slow down the central nervous system, and they act as either sedatives, or they can lower anxiety or reduce stress. Um, Three major types I'm going to talk about. The first being barbiturates, or the major tranquilizers. These were used for sedation or as sedatives in earlier decades pretty widely, and it was found that they were so addictive and people quickly developed a tolerance and became hooked on them that they are less favored than in past decades. In their place are the benzodiazepines, the minor tranquilizers, and these are so common in society that you probably know them by some of their trade names. They are more mild depressants than the major tranquilizers. Valium, Xanax, and Roofies are actually a form of minor benzodiazepine. Roofies are, of course, the commonly known as the date rape drug. If someone slips you a roofie, you become unaware of the actions you're performing, but you are still able to do things and respond to suggestions or commands or directions. It's, as you know, a major problem. Alcohol is a depressant. It is the most common depressant in America. About 10 to 20 million people suffer from alcoholism. It's the most common depressant in the world. It's often mistaken as a stimulant because it loosens people up. It's a depressant, but one thing it depresses are our inhibitions. If you remember from the summer, what was his name? Jimmy G, who had retrograde and anterograde amnesia in The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. He suffered from long-term alcoholism, and that had produced Korsakoff syndrome. It's not the only way you can get Korsakoff syndrome, but the most common. And that made him unable to form long-term memories. The mechanism for alcohol is it is effectively, and it's a little complicated, but it effectively acts as an agonist for GABA, the neurotransmitter GABA. And you have to kind of think this through. GABA is the brain's major inhibitory neurotransmitter. So if you are increasing the function of GABA, you are increasing the neurotransmitter that kind of slows things down. And GABA is the brain's major depressant. It affects memory formation, it affects decision making, and it affects impulse control. Those are three major areas where alcohol will act to increase the effect of GABA. And so what that does is you inhibit memory formation, you impair decision making, and you lose impulse control. And again, that's why, even though it's a depressant, it will act to kind of loosen people up. Narcotics. In the background, that's a picture of opium poppies. What do? They suppress the sensation of pain, and they do that by binding to and stimulating the receptor sites for endorphins. The experience is pain relief and euphoria. The mechanism, I already had just said, they all work in the same way. They work as agonists for endorphins by binding to and stimulating the receptor sites for endorphins. The types of narcotics, they're all derivatives of the opium from the opium poppy. The main ones would be morphine as the current and long-term medical version of opium, and then heroin, which had its heyday in the 70s, and it was just a very harmful drug individually and societally, and as you know has kind of surprised people by resurfacing in the last 5 to 10 years as a problem that a number of states are dealing with. I'll just add, and I think I said this already, but they mimic the action of endorphins so well that the body reduces its own production of endorphins. When the drug wears off, you have no protection against pain, and then you get that intense craving for more heroin or whatever it is. People can take methadone, which doesn't give you the euphoria, but it kind of staves off the withdrawal symptoms, so you can gradually be weaned off the drug as endorphin production in your body naturally resumes. If you remember classical conditioning, the narcotic usage can become associated with the people and places and objects associated with its use. So if somebody gets high in a certain place or with a certain group of people, and then they go back to that place or they are with those people, that can create the urge for drug use. So if you are trying to help an addict, behavioral therapies can be used to counteract this kind of positive reinforcement operant conditioning. And a second type of therapy would be a mix of cognitive behavioral intervention, where you work to kind of change the way people think about the stresses in their lives and react to those stressors so that they begin to develop a more effective way to cope without resorting to the drug. Our final one would be hallucinogens. What they do is they alter how we perceive or interpret sensory experiences. Can mimic the synesthesia, which was from the last chapter. That is a disorder in which the signals from the different sense organs, sight or hearing, are processed in the wrong cortical areas, so that the sense information gets interpreted as more than one sensation. For example, you can hear sound as colors and shapes. That would be the most common form of synesthesia. The hallucinogens can kind of mimic that. The experience of hallucinogens is the hallucinations, obviously, where you get a false sensory experience. You perceive something that you're not actually sensing. And users can feel like they are more conscious or more aware. Experiences seem more vivid. Now, unlike some of the other drugs that primarily produce feelings of euphoria or pleasure, the hallucinogens they make things more vivid or more deeper consciousness, but it's not necessarily good or bad. So that's why people will talk about that they have you can have a bad acid trip. And then very quickly, some of the types are PCP, which is a very scary drug that is not as common now, but in the 80s, when I was younger and your age, was kind of the scourge of society. It can have multiple effects, and I'm putting it in the hallucinogen pile because the book did, but it can actually act sometimes as a stimulant or a depressant or a narcotic. It's hallucinogenic, some associated with extreme violence in some users. Ecstasy or MDMA. Mescaline and psilocybin are natural hallucinogens. Psilocybin found in shrooms. And then the most common one, marijuana, which is a mild intoxicant, can give you sensory distortions or hallucinations and kind of that feel-good feeling. And we're coming in just under 20 minutes. That ends it. Email me, or if you have any questions, or if you want to just kind of post a class comment on Google Classroom with something you're wondering about. Maybe somebody else can answer it. And I will see you Monday. Enjoy the snow. Bye-bye.